Welcome to the second in the series of events associated with the Katherine Dunham exhibits. We're here at Lovejoy Library. My name is Dr. Corey Wilmot of the Department of Anthropology. I'm going to give you a brief bio of Dr. Eugene Redmond, our guest speaker today. Dr. Redmond is actually one of the early graduates of SIUE in 1974. Those classes were happening in Halton and East St. Louis, 64, yeah, 1964. He also received a Master's of English Literature at Washington University. And after that, which is going to be the focus of his talk today for 67 to 69, he was a teacher counselor in the SIUE experiment in higher education. And he continued on from there to be a professor at California State University at Sacramento. And then he came back to East St. Louis for some critical years in the mid to late 80s. And then he went briefly to Wayne State University, and then he came back to be a professor of English here at SIUE. Dr. Redmond has received numerous honors and awards, too numerous to name all of them, in fact. But just some highlights. In the 1970s, he won a National Endowment of the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship. In 76, he was named Poet Laureate of East St. Louis. That same year, he released a bestseller book, Drum Voices, The Mission of Afro-American Poetry, A Critical History. And in 1990, he founded the Drum Voices Review, which is a multicultural literary journal. And thanks to our own archivist here at Lovejoy Library, that is available online, Mr. Steve Kerber at the back has done a lot of work in archiving that journal. And he also has won, that is Eugene Redmond, has also won American Book Award, a Lifetime Achievement Award, numerous other awards, and in 2008, SIUE awarded him an honorary degree in Humane Letters. Recently, Dr. Redmond has donated his archives to the Lovejoy Library and founded the Eugene Redmond Research Center. I'm not sure of the exact name of it, to be honest, but it is upstairs on the second floor, and it is a fantastic resource for history and culture and a variety of other things. So without further ado, I give you Eugene Redmond.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wilmot. And I see colleagues here, writers and scholars. Thanks for coming. One thing, I'm dealing a lot with collections and estates. And so I've acquired a whole new language, a new jargon associated, over all the years I taught and traveled. There were things I hadn't heard, like realia, which is cloth memorabilia, for example. But because of my collection coming to SIU, and the fact that I am executor of estates of other writers and people who've gone on, I also get inquiries from people all over the world wanting to know, how do you do this? How do you deal with accession? And somebody wrote me yesterday, and de-accession. Dr. Kerr, they access your estate or your collection, and these particular people who are relatives and friends and executors of a poet friend of mine who died this year. She was 97, Mari Evans, wonderful poet who's been here on several occasions. They want to know, well, how many years do you let them have it before you de-access the? So there are a lot of terms associated with it. And the one thing I say, which I learned in part from Katherine Dunham, is throw nothing away. Now, there are people in my family who wouldn't agree with it, who come in and say, when are you going to burn this junk? Or, you know. But I always say throw nothing away. And the strange thing about it is, I started this before I met Miss Dunham, but Miss Dunham took local papers and put them in that giant album that newspapers use in their morgues. I have a journalism background, so the morgue is where you store old newspapers. And some people are hired just to clip, you know. But she had these giant albums and everything that was going on. Now they're so important. I mean, what she was collecting. So I just say throw nothing away. And so all of my life I have taken 2 or 3 or 4 of everything I've come in touch with, whether they were coasters or menus or playbills or posters. I just never, I never went by something without taking a copy of it, and I do that. I still do that. And in addition to the collection here at SIUE, I have 6 storages near my house. What for? Who knows? I rent 6 storages. I want to read a poem that I wrote in the 90s for Miss Dunham. I started out writing Miss Dunham's biography, a biography. And as I showed her portions of it, she proceeded to tell me how to write it and what to say. So then I backed away from the idea of a biography and said, I'm writing an impressionistic biography of Miss Dunham. Well, she still started, and then she still went through it and said this and said that. So I said, well, I'm not going to write any kind of biography of Miss Dunham while she's alive, but I'm going to write an epic poem. And so I began to write the epic poem in 1990 when I went to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and this was arranged for me by the Loft, which is one of the most important literary organizations, you know, in the country. And they let me live in a home there for 6 consecutive summers, and the home had never been occupied by anybody other than a visual artist. They never had a literary artist there. But because I read, I was a judge for an annual contest offered to writers who do nonfiction, and we just got to know each other. Well, and I said to them, I'm looking for a place to write. You know, I want to, you know. Gwendolyn Brooks said to me, I shut down in the summers, and I take no gigs. I don't do anything. I just write. So I said, I'm gonna get a running start on it. Gwendolyn Brooks told me that in the 70s, and I said, I'm gonna get a running start on this, and I'm gonna do the same thing. So I finally started doing it, and so this piece was begun in 1990, or this is a portion of something that was begun in 1990 in Minneapolis at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design in the house there. So there are lots of terms. Some are from dance, some anthropology, some from the period in which she lived, and I won't explain them all, but I'm hoping that some of the rhythm will help you pick it up. Let me just say that I read, I was visiting at Leiden University in the Netherlands and in the 70s, and I read to a group, many of whom didn't speak English, and there was a man, a short man, about that thick, who kept weaving and bobbing and dancing, and he was Russian. He spoke no English, but he was just picking up on the inner city. You know, the cities, you know, have countries have something, and so he was picking up on it. And he came up and bear hugged me, and really didn't understand a word on the surface, but he understood a lot of what I was saying. Choreo Cosmo Empresses Legacy, Legacy, lands on East St. Earth, apropos Katherine Dunham. Of Katherine, her century, this homage to her legacies, her divine sachets, her leg bars, to her life struts, her sachets, her life marks, to her drum mobiles, her lower residencies, to her consciousness, her woman's work, her wakefulness. And they're in part, that's part one. Part two. Of this lady undulator, imprinting the metroplex with cosmophonic leg lore, shuttling between East Boogie, named for East St. Louis, and invisible provinces of Vodun, of a possessed Oba diva, romancing multitonal shadows reborn as figurines, as flesh, of Sister Serpentine and the slow dragging Yanvalu. Serpentine, snaking through stormy weather and blue splendent cabins in the sky. Of Madame Gong Gong, stomp, ring, shout, tongue, bump, tap, cakewalk, ball, chain, jerk. Of Lady Curator, excavating lost countries. Of Madame River Grinder and cornbread midwife to the blues. Of the mysteries choreographer, choreographer to the oracles, temple founder, swords woman, drum priestess, Caribbeanologist, Dambala's lover, born again silver warrior. Of chariots of legs engulfed in wings. Legacies, and sometimes the C's is CY and SEES and SEAS. Her cosmic transport and metronome. Of Katherine's choreopera, descending to East St. Earth in a Port-au-Princely slink. Hambone to Minnehaha, Sally Walker to Yaya. Of Katherine's leggage, Catherine Incarnate, Peripatetic Museums, Stilt Walking Archives, Drum-Stung Zombies, Rum-Drenched Desires, Circumnavigating Torsos, Serpentine Twist of Sweet Sweat Libations, of 532 North 10th Street, her 60s centered ambiance, a plie away from More Charm's djembe and her namesake museum and workshop, where children glitter in choreo gardens near brash heaps of human litter, of a fresh century inheriting the largesse of her legacies, reconnecting estranged continents, legacies for the legions, goom bopping, their shout outs to the ballerina of East Boogie, of her century and this homage, her century and Langston's, Margaret Walker's, Zora's, and Melvin B. Tolson's, T.S. Eliot's, and Duke's, her century and Ruth St. Denis's, Isadora Duncan's, Du Bois's, and Martha Graham's, of her century, its riot of memories, child eyes drunk on night skies and a special star, the awakening hiss, shout, sting of color lines of God's Glen Ellen and AME's Joliet, Chicago's gumbo of causes, its cult kingdoms and up south promised lands, drum jive and carryovers, its cube and dance theaters, its Negro ballet, its WPA, its Richard Wright, Canada Lee, Studs Terkel, its Ned Miller Speranza, Baptist Bulwarks, and Rosenwald Foundation, its havens from Hitler's Reich, of Catherine's life-length paradigm, a splicing of anthropology and dance, of our worlds as her stages, ageless Africa in the round, of 1930s New York, of Negro evenings, Europe as little theater, of London's darling, Paris's Esprit Noir, Amsterdam's Empress, Senegal's Isis, Haiti's priestess of Meringue, Tokyo's Ebony Geisha, East St. Africa's choreographer laureate, Catherine's century as a sister precursor, MTV, BET, video, breakdance, mega funk, and Dunk Adalia of Alvin, James, Tina, Patty, Michael, Debbie, and Yo-Yo. Her century and Sterling Brown's, their Negro caravan, Bojangles', Josephine's, Buckminster Fuller's, Miles Davis's, ours. Out of her century, this homage, blues script, hymnal of arias and gut buckets, ode of East Boogie, a squatter's tale of Shoto, 10th Street, State Street in Hawkville, of Diamond Twinkle Katherine, her leggage, of visions blending like rainbows and curling up into flames, and in the contagious wink of a thigh or a feather rising like gospel to engulf our brilliant grievings and striving to choreograph the Lord's bidding. So that was the beginning of an epic poem on Katherine Dunham. I think of Miss Dunham often, fondly, and deeply. And I interviewed her several times. I photographed her thousands of times. I ate her cooking. Wherever she went, she learned how to cook. She was an anthropologist. She got with the people. And so she cooked food underground, overground, in the air, all kinds of, you name it. Things that you wouldn't think of eating if you saw them crawling around. She was a different woman, and I learned so much from her, and knew that so much more was possible until when I was on the road in the 60s and 70s. I would say if you spent 6 months around Miss Dunham every day, it'd be worth a BA from Harvard or Spelman or Cambridge or Oxford. I mean, all the languages, all the philosophies, people that she knew, Bertrand Russell, T.S. Eliot, that she met. I mean, I had a master's in English when I met her, and I started talking about Eliot, and she blew me away. And I had been told by a professor at SIUE that I should stop reading Eliot, preferably forever, but at least 10 years. And I asked why. He was the gun of the 20th century. He was the poet, so I just dug into him. And you could wake me up now and I can recite Eliot until you tell me to stop. He said, well, I said, why? He said, because everything is coming out of little Eliot. You're going to lose the potential for your own voice. So stop reading T.S. Eliot. But then I ran into Dunham. This is a professor who tells me at WashU that you know as much about T.S. Eliot as the professors do. Because, I'm just trying to do what does it mean to be a scholar? What does it mean to be a thinker? Who should you read? How much of him or her should you read? And then I meet Miss Dunham with degrees in anthropology, and she just sits there with me, and for as long as I can go, she's sitting there with me talking about T.S. Eliot. I just popped back over the river from a teacher who said, stop reading it, enough. So that's just an example of Miss Dunham. Now, Miss Dunham did some remarkable things in her life. She was a revolutionary from childhood. In her teens, a doctor told her that you have arthritis. You do one or two things: live with it or change careers. This is a teenager. Well, we know the story. So after I found that out, I would study those films and see her come down, and I could see where she favored a leg. And I do it because I got an injury from the Marines. So I favor this with this leg, which gives me a little problem now. But I would see her come down and I could tell how she would never, it was always, but over here she would. So she was favoring the arthritic aspects of her body. And we know the story. I mean, we know who she was, on the surface, what she did. But wow. So she was a revolutionary. She was an athlete. And I think Jackie Joyner Kersey, who admires her greatly and who studied Dunham technique at Mary Brown Center in East St. Louis and Lincoln Park, she studied dance and then became an athlete. Miss Dunham was an athlete and became a dancer. It's kind of interesting. But she took Dunham courses, vigorously as a girl. And we know who she is, female athlete of the 20th century. So Miss Dunham was always a revolutionary. Let's go on. She talked to me about how she would go to a party in Chicago. Chicago is known for its cold weather. She would go to a party and she would not wear the clothes she needed to wear, like long johns, and because she wanted to show off what she had. And she said she'd be freezing to death, but she would go out, things like that I'm sure lots of women can identify with in some way or another. But she was a revolutionary. Her company, her dance company, which she supported as an entrepreneur. She always had an impresario, but she supported her company. She never got grants. She never got money from the government. And she said to me, Eugene, I always had to look after 15 to 25 people. And you're talking about an interracial, multisexual, that's the term I got from Maya Angelou years ago. One of these incredible women that I've been exposed to in my life. But multisexual, multiracial, okay? And then she has to send her secretary ahead to book the company, because Miss Dunham couldn't go and book the company, because of segregation, discrimination. So she sent a white secretary in to book rooms for the company. It requires a kind of deviousness and a deceptiveness. I lived through that era, colored white bathrooms. When I went south as a Marine. But so she was and I saw it in other ways how she ran the company, and I won't talk about that, but when she knew a lot about psychology. She took four leaders of the movement, myself included, to meet with Erich Fromm. Now, some of you may not know. You have to look up this name, Erich Fromm. It's like going to meet Sigmund Freud. She flew us to New York. You never knew when she said, "Pack your bag, Eugene, we're going." And you just arrived at her house. I always drove. She never drove. I was her chauffeur, her bodyguard, her translator, confidant. And she had a car, but she didn't trust. I would take her car, take my car. But she was a revolutionary. So she took us there because this man had fought the Nazi machine in Germany. They had met in the 30s when he came to this country to raise money for the anti-Nazi cause. And he knew, he was a psychiatrist. He knew a lot about a lot of things. So he taught us things during those 4 days and then in subsequent conversations about the movement, how to spy out Asian provocateurs so that a peaceful gathering wouldn't be turned into mob action. You know, we hadn't even thought. We knew. I mean, we were engaging in what we call healthy paranoia. You know, we suspected everything and everybody. You know, if there was somebody you didn't know in the room, well, he's an agent. She's an agent. You know, we had that, but there were fine-tuning that we needed, that Eric Fromm. When you read about this, man, you'll understand the unbelievable privilege of her flying us to New York to meet with this guy. You know, so she was a revolutionary. She spoke in various places, and in one auditorium in the South, she said, "I won't come back here until people who look like me don't have to sit up there in the balcony, until they can sit down here with all the other human beings. So I will never come back here to perform." When Miss Dunham first got here in 1967, she was arrested within days in East St. Louis because she went to the aid of a young man, Darrell Braddock, who was arrested for agitating for free speech. Took him to jail for free speech, exercising his First Amendment rights. Sound familiar? She was taken to jail. Wivetta Young, another great woman who was my mentor, served 30 plus years in the Illinois legislature, got her out of prison. And of course, later the same city that put her in jail for going to the aid of a young man who was arrested for using his First Amendment rights, gave her the key to the city. Miss Dunham and a friend of hers, an Asian colleague of hers, did an article in the 40s, or did a study on what happens to communities that are depressed, oppressed, disenfranchised. And she said, okay, and what the study concluded, alcohol, an extreme kind of evangelism, sometimes taking you into the arms of people like a Jim Jones. And you know, I see it every day. My friend Quincy Troop and I walked in Harlem one day. We walked 8 blocks and counted 47 storefront churches. Now, you know, I'm all for faith and all for worship, but who needs 47 storefront churches in 8 blocks? And I thought, Miss Dunham again, Miss D again. That's the study, you know, the overload. You know, so liquor store, church, liquor store, church, liquor store, church. The overload. That's Miss Dunham again, the visionary, the revolutionary, the seer. So Miss Dunham and I had a fantastic relationship. I went to one of the rich suburbs in St. Louis, picked up some wealthy, beautiful, wealthy women, brought them to Miss Dunham. They wanted to know how they could help and so on and so forth. Well, Miss Dunham started using her various languages, including some street language that she'd gotten from us. I said I was a translator. And she said that anthropologists are interested in people's grunts and farts. And some of the language is a little bit deeper than that. And so when I brought the women out to the limousine to take them back, they were they were just, Dunham using all of these languages, European languages and Asian languages, and then talking to them very matter-of-factly and frankly and in a raw way about some of the needs of the inner city. That was Miss Dunham. There's a photo in the exhibit of Miss Dunham and Black Panthers from New Haven, Connecticut. The photo was taken of a panel of us at Yale University in 1968. I'm in the photo. One of my students, Ron Tibbs, who later died, trained by Miss Dunham, trained by me. You should have heard of him, that he had his own challenges. But he was in a play with Danny Glover in 1976. And he got better reviews. He was better looking and all that. That's how a lot of people were launched. Ron had some personal challenges that he demons that he didn't meet well, but he was ready for the world. You would hear of him. The people that actors today, they don't hold a candle. They wouldn't have held a candle to him, but trained by Miss Dunham. Miss Dunham recognized what was valuable about the community, and she said over and over, one thing that kept her in East St. Louis, or drew her to East St. Louis, were the grandmothers. I was raised by a grandmother. My mother passed when I was 9, so I really understand what she meant. That the grandmothers, if you've ever seen a grandmother at work, and I'm sure most of us have, you know what I'm talking about, what she was talking about. Your professional development, your general human development, your embracing of a cause, they were paramount for Miss Dunham. You're taking up air that somebody else could breathe if you don't have an agenda. Why are you here? What is your agenda? What is your plan? I say to kids at Dunbar Elementary School and Miles Davis Elementary School before it closed, you're never too young to have a plan. I came home in '85. I had been traveling for 16 years, still interacting with Miss Dunham, but I took off in the late 60s and early 70s. And one of my friends said, Red, the reason you got so successful, whatever that meant. You're a professor and you come out of a family where everybody didn't finish high school. So that's really successful. It really is. But he said, the reason you're so successful is because you always had a plan. I said, what do you mean? He said, we used to be walking up and down the railroad tracks and we were 11, 12, and 13. He said, you laid all of this out. He said, not the specifics of it, but you said things you were going to do. You knew you were going to be somebody, and so you laid that out. So Miss Dunham, some things you forget that you've said, and then of course Miss Dunham comes along and says, everybody should have a plan. Everybody in that class ought to have an agenda. Everybody in that plan ought to have certain things, you know, where they get it from the Quran, the Talmud, the Bible, the Buddhist, wherever you get it from. Have you a list of things that will allow you to carve out a life, a fulfilling life. Miss Dunham was a revolutionary, came to East St. Louis, turned it around. Now, how do you, as a black woman, you're not one of the 4 stereotypical black women people. In other words, you're not a teacher, you're not a nurse, you're not a secretary. You get my point? You come in, you're an anthropologist. A what? And you're a dancer. A what? Can you dance like Tina Turner? And you're a Vodun aficionado, advocate. You're a high priestess in Vodun or voodoo. I mean, her nickname was the Black Witch of 10th Street in the community. Okay? So how do you come into a community, you're not a soror, how do you survive in a black community and you're not in a sorority if you have a degree? How do you survive in a black community and you're not a Baptist or a Methodist or one of the 3 backsliders in the black world? And Maya used to say, she said the 3 atheists in the whole black world. Okay, so so if you're not these things, you're a black woman and you're going to come in and command the field? Everybody, black women in here know exactly what I'm talking about. You better get yourself some church. You better get yourself some school. You better get yourself a husband, a black husband. So she has a white husband. She's an anthropologist. What is that? She was the first one I met. She said that when she met Neale Hurston at a party in Chicago, she thought she was the only black woman anthropologist in the country. And she said in public, she said, during an interview I did with her, she said, I was jealous. She said she was such a cute little thing. She said, I was jealous. She said, I thought I was the finest, baddest, woman in the world, and the only black anthropologist. So she was a revolutionary. But stew on that now. You come to a black community and you're going to literally sort of, redirect it, which is what she did. And you don't have any of the credentials that a black woman would have. I mean, she was a revolutionary, and I talk about this on the road, when I'm talking to sororities and fraternities and Christians and Jews. And, this is what makes up the community. I know why 3 successive women superintendents in East St. Louis were deltas. I mean, I understand, I mean, I have to explain these things. I know who runs these communities. The churches and the sororities and the fraternities and the secret societies, Daughters of the Eastern Star, the Masons, the Elks. We know who run the community. Dunham came in without any portfolio, historically. Revolutionary. And had it. She was so important until girls lied and said they were taking Dunham techniques. So much pressure. So, you know what I mean? Everybody was going over and they'd come back and add that to the boogaloo or the jerk. And so, and so I literally heard him say, yes, I'm taking classes, because that's how much pressure was out there. I mean, classes were everywhere. They were in the senior centers. They were in the schools. They were in the park. They were in the church basements. Dunham technique. I mean, even I know, you know, I tell my writers, you want to loosen up. Because people would ask, well, why do your writers loose? Why are they so loose? I said, because I told them, you know, learn some Dunham technique, learn some karate, learn how to shake your booty. And then when you get up there, you saw what I did as a poet, but you're coming out of the culture. You're coming from, as Stevie Wonder said, ask, where am I coming from? So, of course, Dunham was a revolutionary. She went up against so many kinds of evils. 1992, she almost killed herself. She almost starved to death. You know about it. 47 days she didn't eat. And she said she wasn't going to eat until Bush, the first one, came here and acknowledged that America had a poor policy for Haitian refugees. It didn't have that policy with the Cubans and, you know, going and on and on. But this was a black country. And so, yes, she fasted. People came from all over, Farrakhan, Aristide, the president of Haiti. People came from all, and she knew, and she just called people. One day she said to me, well, let's call Teddy. And I said, Teddy who? She said, Kennedy. And then she said, well, we need to call George. And I said, George McBundy. So some of you may not know the name, but again, look up the name. She just knew people. Nothing was allowed to get in the way of her work on behalf of the people, on behalf of human uplift, on behalf of the fight for racial and social justice, on behalf of you becoming the best person you could be. And nothing got in the way of Miss Dunham. And so, I think, I think the idea of Miss Dunham being a revolutionary, this morning, one of my former colleagues from the Experiment in Higher Education, which was the umbrella for after the higher SIUE administration, it was the umbrella for programs that were going on in East St. Louis. So under the Experiment in Higher Education, where I worked, there was the Performing Arts Training Center, the Dunham Centers for Arts and Humanities. And then you had Upward Bound, and you had, WIN, and you had all kinds of other programs, right? And Miss Dunham was always going up the line and questioning things, asking for this and asking for that. Always, as one would say, might say, bucking the system. So, but anyway, this one colleague of mine, Dr. Joyce Ladner, who taught in the Experiment in Higher Education and had some interaction with Katherine Dunham. And Joyce Ladner, you should look up the name. She did a book called Tomorrow's Tomorrow, which was a study of socialization processes among black girls in Pruitt-Igoe Project in St. Louis. Joyce got her PhD in sociology at 24. She was the youngest black sociologist in the United States at that time. And she said to me, I hope you're taping your talk today because I want to hear it, you know, as a EHE alum. I want to be in on what's being said about Miss Dunham and East St. Louis. So yes, revolutionary. Thank you. Let me get some. I'm gonna pass out.
We have a few minutes left over if anyone would like to make questions for Dr. Redmond or comments.
And I want to pass out a flyer to show you how we still work in the Dunham tradition. This is something coming up next month in East St. Louis, at the East St. Louis Higher Education Campus, SIUE Center. And it just gives you an idea. Some of these people came through Miss Dunham or through EHE, and Miss Dunham said, like, don't take up needless air on the planet. Be about something. So we're gonna, as one writer said, from womb time to tomb time, I hope to have made a difference. So, yeah.
I have a question. So in those years you were with her and working with her in 67 to 69,
Yeah.
you worked with her on the Ode to Taylor Jones.
Right.
Can you just say a few words about the significance of that play?
Sure. Ms. Dunham was a revolutionary. So we had a young man who had been a classmate of mine at SIU. I went to SIU before. I worked for SIU. Killed on the way to Chicago. And his name was Taylor Jones III. He was head of the 5-state region of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. And he was killed, and Miss Dunham wrote a play, The Ode to Taylor Jones. And there was a line with that. Taylor Jones said, when I die, I don't want my brothers to cry. When I go out, oh death to meet, I want fire and dancing in the streets. That's the kind of thing she wrote. Taylor Jones was never bought in life or after, never caught. All he wanted in that last hour were 2 rich words, black power. Those are lines from play. And we took it on the road. 16 high schools in Connecticut, toured the East Coast, throughout the Midwest. This is the indigenous company that Ms. Dunham formed out of East St. Louis material, East St. Louis humanity, that was stabilized by members of her adult companies from the past. And so they would come in and train and maybe take lead roles occasionally. But the entire production for those years, everywhere we went, was peopled by East St. Louis trainees from the Performing Arts Training Center that constituted the Indigenous Company. And just those lines that I recited for you, it was an entire ballet, a whole play. And you can see from the lines that I recited that she minced no words and minced no movements in getting points over, having to do with the seeking of freedom and equality. There were rumors that Taylor Jones's car had been adjusted so that his brakes would go out on the road. That was always, I mentioned the phrase healthy paranoia at the very beginning, and that was always around. It was always a possibility. And one of the things, Ms. Dunham got that whole idea of when I go out, oh death to meet, I want fire and dancing in the street. She went to funerals with me. It was like weekly. And there was somebody shot by police or in some kind of, the word internecine, brother killing brother. But we were all caught up there. And she saw this. And when she saw Taylor Jones's funeral, where I spoke at St. Paul Baptist Church, she saw the hundreds, later thousands of young people marching in the street with candles and flashlights. And that's where that section of the play comes from. Taylor Jones said, when I die, I don't want my brothers to cry. When I go out, oh death to me, I want fire and dancing in the street. So I actually showed her that. I showed her this law, as far as you can see here. People with candles and flashlights. And she incorporated that. I want fire and dancing in the street. Yes.
I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. But Arlita, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For sharing your experiences.
Thank you all. Thank you all.